I think it's harder to do because people have expectations around dawn service. They on Anzac Day, they have lived experiences of Anzac Day, so they know what they want. But when your starting point around something like Anzac Day is, to preserve lives, it's to make sure that people maintain social distancing and we respect our frontline health workers at this time. It all falls into place pretty quickly. You just work out that what we need to do is to, sort of honour the spirit of Anzac Day and all those who have served, whilst also observing, respectfully the need to create distance. So it's just a balance about commemorating the day, honouring those who have served, whilst being true to the directions at this unprecedented time. So a challenge, but it's. I think everyone will agree that it's one that we've met.
So still a service going on, obviously. I suppose you're just hoping people still set the alarm clocks, maybe they can sleep in a little bit later and get a hot drink and crowd around the TV, maybe be in driveways streaming it,
well,
and some ideas?
Both, I hope. I hope that what people will do is watch the service either online or stream it or on their devices or their phones, and then when that concludes, then move out to their driveways, their balconies, their front lawns, and as the RSL are asking them to do, to light up the dawn.
And look, we're seeing new skills already pop up in isolation. I saw someone was learning the last post on the guitar today, so I suppose any instrument...
That too, any instrument.
Is there a print out sheet people can do and they sort of hold their own ceremony? Is that the sort of thing you're encouraging, that people might be able to tap in that way?
Well, on Anzac Day, what we're encouraging people to do is to commemorate it in a way that's meaningful to them. So haven't gone down the posting the music to the last post, but thank you. I'll get on to that after this. I think that getting kids to sit down and think about sort of the recipe for Anzac bickies and how can they do that. Thinking about, we're encouraging people to read the ode, to recite the ode, and then post that online. We're encouraging people, Anzac Day, typically for us, we have very high visitation. People come into the commemorative area, the Roll of Honour, place a poppy. Well, they won't be able to do that this year, so they can place a poppy online.
Your own career in this career move, you've always had an interest in military history. Some people might say, diplomat on the rise, but it felt like something you'd never...
I don't know who would say diplomat. Thank you.
You'd never say no to, or as soon as it popped up, you thought, that's me?
No, my trajectory was at the end of my current post, or then posting in London. I was coming home. I expected to go back into the department and do whatever job I was given. I call it the Foreign Service, and I'm there to serve. I anticipated I was coming home, and in my spare time, I would have acted as a volunteer at the War Memorial. And it was only after Brendan and some others suggested that I apply that I did, and without any genuine expectation that I'd be offered the job. But imagine my surprise.
So, talking about that, you would have been here as a volunteer anyway. We always hear, pursue the career you'd like to do anyway. In a sense, that's what you have done. You've tried to instil a strong sense of Australia's military history and sacrifice in your family as well. Well,
I think people would say, if they look at me and my trajectory, that back from a 10-year-old boy, or certainly a 10, 12-year-old boy, when my parents were both primary school teachers, we'd come up to Canberra and we would always come to the War Memorial first, and then we'd go to the Mint and we'd drive around. Funnily enough, drive around Yarralumla and look at the embassy. So perhaps some of that was subliminal. I don't know. But they certainly, and we drive past Untruan, the military college, and when you put all those building blocks together, that's what I ended up doing. But it was never... thought that I'd end up in the War Memorial, but I've always had with primary school, as teachers, as parents, the idea that, we should be telling people and teaching people and encouraging people to learn more about our military history.
When you're talking about Villers-Bretonneux, one of the fascinating little anecdotes from reading about it was someone unpacking their furniture and they started putting it back in their house, and another village resident went past and said, "What are you doing? The Germans are quite close." And he said, "Don't worry, the Australians just arrived."
That's right.
This, not just the courage, but this ability at the time of the Australian soldier has just been renowned in the town ever since.
Yeah, well, and of course, and it's the site of the Australian Memorial, and it's the place that we gather on Anzac Day. Sadly not this year, but I have every confidence that the people of Villers-Bretonneux, indeed the people of Flanders, will pause and remember the contributions of all, the people that are still buried there. I mean, we mustn't forget the thousands, 60,000 Australians died in the First World War, and many of them are still buried there.
You mentioned before that perhaps it was the difficulty of Vietnam War. You can mention other recent battles, for example, Afghanistan, that there was issues and debates around whether or not we should be there. We've just had the World War I commemorations as such a big focus. What's your focus next? Is it to try to think of different ways to talk about Vietnam and other wars?
Well, I think the most important part of the Australian War Memorial is it belongs to all Australians. And my view, and indeed my vision for the War Memorial, is to ensure that it continues to be relevant. As you say, we've just come off a very high watermark of the commemorations, the centenary of the 1914-18 war, and of course we'll then have other, what the Americans would call round number events coming up when we start commemorating other significant anniversaries as they come through related to the Second World War in particular. Victory in the Pacific Day later this year, for example. It's about making sure that the War Memorial is relevant. What this is first and foremost is a place where we tell the story of the individual, and through the story of the individual you can almost disaggregate the numbers. When you go upstairs into the honour roll and the commemorative area and see 102,000 names cast in bronze, for some people that's just too many to comprehend. But if you break it down to a story,
one private's journey, why they signed up, or when they were conscripted, what happened to them, the letter back to mum,
their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, the potential unrealised, the contribution, the sacrifice that the individual made, not just those that are recorded in the Roll of Honour, but all those who have served. They all have a story to tell. I'm very struck that when the War Memorial was opened in 1941, we had, I think it was 50,000 photographs. We now have 4 million photographs on our database and our records. It's telling those stories and making sure that whoever you were, whatever your conflict, whatever your theatre of operations, whatever your area of expertise was, that when you come to the War Memorial you can see part of your story told. So increasingly for me, of course, that'll be about people who have served on either the most recent operations or contemporary operations that are still underway, because the most important part about the War Memorial is its relevance, its continued relevance, and under my watch that's what I'll be determined to do, to make sure we continue, as we are here in the First World War Gallery, that we continue to tell the stories of heroism, of triumph, of tragedy, of fear, of hope, of endeavour, and then we move into the Second World War, Korea, Malaya, Borneo, Vietnam, of course, and then the subsequent operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, peacekeeping. The memorial belongs to all Australians, so we should be telling the stories and providing a vehicle in which we can thank those who have served.
If you go back to the early 90s, we had real fears that Anzac Day might be sort of dying out with a generation. Clearly that hasn't happened. You've spoken a lot about the focus being recent battles. Is that the next challenge? Not to have an uncritical view of what's happened in the past, but to perhaps, again, personalise things and experiences in those battles and those wars?
I think the role of the memorial is to, through the individual, is to talk about the causes, the conduct, and ultimately the consequences of all of the wars that Australians have been involved in, and it's about telling the truth. It's actually about allowing a soldier to give their narrative, but also providing the broader context in which they served, because all of them served at the government's pleasure. All of them went at the government's direction to do whatever it was they chose to do. And for me, it's about providing context, and it's about providing truth, and it's about providing an individual story in what sometimes are sort of global conflagrations, and just allowing us to interpret that individually.
It might seem like something, this War Memorial, when you look around, that, we're talking about some heavy material, might not always seem necessarily child-friendly, but you've had a strong interest writing books for school-aged people as well, to get them interested. What do you find speaks to them?
Well, it changes over time. I mean, I do know my own experience when we went to the Sir John Monash Centre, for example, in Villers-Bretonneux, and this is a very highly, very, very new, very, very ambitious
It had a bit of a tech focus.
Well, it had both. It had both the relics, which of course I was drawn to, and the ability to look at particularly the things that were recovered in the excavation of the site to build it. And I was very taken by those, and that was my interest because they tell a story. But yet I had my then 18-year-old daughter, and the thing that she was most taken by was the high-end, high technology, the reenacted, the audio-visual. That's what. So it needs, a museum needs to speak to as broad an audience as possible, to make them pause, think, acknowledge, and hopefully encourage others to visit and explore in their own way. But a very, very good memorial, and bear in mind the Australian War Memorial is not just a museum. It is first and foremost a shrine. It is a memorial to the fallen and those who have served. It is then a museum that provides the context to the experience that ultimately led to 102,000 lives to be lost. And of course, we're also very, very proudly a research centre and an archive. So I want people to come and explore as many facets of the War Memorial as they possibly can. But the power of the Australian War Memorial is how it affects the individual. My favourite object of the 4 million odd that we have here is George Giles' uniform. It's a mud-splattered World War I uniform because it speaks to Bean's vision when he saw the digger coming out, saw George coming out of the front line, mud-splattered, the puggarees, the tin hat, and he just said, I want that. That tells the story, and he requisitioned his uniform and one other. We have it here today, still with the mud on it, still with the backpacks, still with his personal items, his knife and his fork and his spoon, the cigarette butts from his pocket that he'd saved just maybe for later on. Those sorts of things, that's just one item that speaks to me because it speaks to Bean's vision, which of course was a promise to a digger, a mortally wounded digger at Pozières in 1916 when he was asked, will they remember me in Australia? The Australian War Memorial is the answer to that promise, but it's a promise that goes over the generations. It continues 105 years on. We continue to promise that we will remember all those who have served the Australian Defence Forces. And so that's the power of one object. It could be the first trench sign that been recovered, or it could be the Bushmaster that's in the Afghan gallery, because I tell you what, to the people who were in the Bushmaster and survived, and we never lost a digger and a Bushmaster, a remarkable piece of Australian ingenuity, engineering, and craftsmanship. The Bushmaster speaks to a new generation of soldiers in the same way that the mud-splattered puggarees of George Giles do to an earlier generation.
Well, we hope we can get people in again, seeing these amazing relics, not for now, but...
Well, even if they can't come in, they can still visit us online. And of course, Anzac Day, we're encouraging people to study, to explore Anzac at home. But there's still an awful lot of, you can still do virtual tours of the galleries online. You can still do your family history online. And we know that on Anzac Day, for example, whilst people will visit the War Memorial website to explore the reasons behind Anzac Day and the history of Anzac Day, throughout the day their interest morphs into family history, and they start going down the lines of researching individual people and campaigns. And we would just encourage people with the extra time, because the footy's not on this year.
Yep.
Sadly, as a Collingwood supporter, and I can hear the audience turning off as we speak. As a Collingwood supporter, it'll be a time that I'll be sitting there with my family, and we'll be exploring our own military history and why the Australian War Memorial will continue to have relevance to future generations.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of footy replays on already, so perhaps more of an opportunity, as you say, to delve back into time. We appreciate your time today. All the best this Anzac Day.
Thanks, Tom.